Welcome back to Reformed Thinking. Today we're diving into something really central to Christian life, the Lord's Supper.
It's the rite that continues, after baptism initiates you into the visible church.
Right, the continuing rite. And Christ himself set it up for the church to remember his death.
That's the core, a commemoration established by Christ.
But here's the paradox, isn't it? It's something almost every Christian group does, this common factor.
Yeah, it should unite.
But historically, oh boy, different interpretations have really kept groups apart. Sometimes tragically so.
Absolutely. So our mission today, if you will, is to sort of unpack that. We want to look at the big things everyone does agree on.
The consensus.
Right. The 6 essential agreements. And then we have to tackle the disagreements, the big 5 points of conflict.
And that leads us into the 4 major historical views, doesn't it? Catholic, Lutheran, Reformed, Zwinglian. Trying to figure out what presence and efficacy actually mean.
Exactly. How do they try to solve these puzzles?
Okay, let's start positive, the common ground. Before things got really philosophical and argumentative.
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of unity on the basics, the what and why of the practice itself. These agreements really shape it for almost everyone. #tag establishment by Christ. First point, and it's crucial. Jesus himself started this. It wasn't a later church invention.
Its authority comes directly from him.
Precisely. And we see this pop up everywhere in the early writings, Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22. They all have accounts of Jesus at that last meal, instituting it.
And what really strikes me is Paul, 1 Corinthians 11. He lays it out in detail, saying he received this tradition and passed it on. And his letters were circulating, well, before the Gospels were even written down, right?
Like several years before Mark, yeah. Which tells you this wasn't some afterthought. It was there from the absolute beginning of the church's practice.
So, okay, maybe we can't reconstruct the exact words Jesus used second by second.
Probably not.
But the fact that he established it, that he commanded it, that's certain. It wasn't just for those disciples then. It was for us now.
An institution for future generations. Definitely. Yeah. #tag the necessity of repetition. And that flows right into the second agreement. It has to be repeated.
Yeah.
It wasn't a one-off symbolic meal.
It's the continuing ordinance.
Yes. And the command is clear. Do this in remembrance of me. Luke records it. Paul repeats it. It's an authoritative instruction.
A binding command for the church.
Like Paul gives us the duration, doesn't he? He says, we proclaim the Lord's death.
Until he comes. 1 Corinthians 11.26.
Right. So it spans the entire church age.
Yeah.
It connects us right now back to his death and forward to his return.
And practically speaking, we need that repetition. We're forgetful.
Yeah.
Doctrines, even central ones like the atonement, they can just fade into the background, become sort of assumed knowledge.
The supper forces us to bring it back.
Consciously.
Exactly. To reflect on it actively. Keep it from becoming just wallpaper theology, #tag, a form of proclamation. Okay, third agreement. Everyone agrees the rite is, at the very least, a proclamation. It sets forth Christ's death.
Like a dramatization of the gospel message, a visible word.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it proclaims in 3 dimensions of time.
Okay, explain that.
Well, it points backward, obviously, to Christ's death on the cross, the historical event.
The foundation.
Then it declares a present truth. The need for us right now to examine ourselves, to partake worthily.
That reflective element.
And then, as we just said, it looks forward, proclaiming his death until he comes. Hope.
And there's that other dimension, too, the horizontal one.
Right. It symbolizes our fellowship, our connection with each other as believers, not just vertical, with God. #tag a spiritual benefit to the partaker.
Now this agreement might surprise some people, given all the fighting later. Everyone agrees it's not just, doing your duty. There's a spiritual benefit.
Participating actually confers something positive spiritually. It's meant to nourish the believer.
An occasion for spiritual growth, for strengthening our connection to Christ.
Absolutely. It contributes to our spiritual vitality. Now, how it does that and who gets it and under what conditions, that's where the arguments start.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question later.
But the basic idea that the Lord meets with his people in a special way here, that's broadly accepted. It's spiritual food. #tag restriction to followers of Christ. 5th point. This isn't for just anybody. It's not like handing out flyers on the street.
Right. It signifies a relationship. Discipleship.
It shouldn't be administered indiscriminately. The original context shows this, right? Yeah. Jesus gave it to his inner circle. his disciples.
And Judas had left by then, hadn't he? The group was, in a sense, purified.
Good point. And Paul hammers this home in 1 Corinthians 11. He talks about self-examination.
Critically important.
You have to partake in a worthy manner. And that means understanding what you're doing, believing, reflecting. Otherwise, Paul warns, it's actually harmful.
An offense against Christ's body and blood. So it's restricted to, well, practicing believers, people who can actually do that self-examination.
People capable of serious reflection and who profess faith. Yes. Hashtag tag the horizontal dimension.
And the last area of consensus loops back to something you mentioned, the horizontal aspect. It's not just me and Jesus.
Not at all. It's profoundly communal. It's for the body, the church.
Paul, in 1 Corinthians 10, makes a big deal about the one loaf, doesn't he?
He does. He says, because we all partake of that one loaf, which represents Christ's body, we are one body.
So if there are divisions, factions, or disregard for other believers, like the Corinthians were doing, some eating while others went hungry,
it completely undermines the meaning of the supper. It contradicts the unity it's supposed to display.
So it has to be practiced together as a gathered community, not in isolation.
That unity is integral to its meaning.
Okay.
So that's the foundation. 6 points of pretty solid agreement on the what and why.
Structure, purpose, who it's for.
Well, but now we hit the wall. The disagreements start when we ask how. What's actually happening with the bread and wine, and what's the precise benefit?
This is where the metaphysics comes in, and honestly, where centuries of debate really ignited. We need to tread carefully here. The absolute core issue, maybe the issue, is Jesus's words. This is my body. Simple words, profound disagreement. How literally do we take them?
Well, taking them absolutely literally, it creates some significant conceptual hurdles right from the start at the Last Supper itself.
Explain that. If Jesus meant the bread was his physical body right then
His physical human body would have been in two places at once.
Yes.
Sitting there talking to them.
And also somehow in the bread he was holding.
Exactly. And for those of us in the Reformed tradition who believe the incarnation meant Christ's human nature was localized, that's a problem. It seems to undermine the very nature of the incarnation.
Denying the limitations he took on in his humanity.
And that problem doesn't go away when the church continues the practice. In fact, it gets tangled up with, well, Greek philosophy.
Ah, yes. Aristotle. Substance and accidents. You can't really understand the Catholic or Lutheran views without grasping this distinction.
It's key. Aristotle talked about the underlying reality of its substance, what it truly is.
Like, this is bread. Its essence is breadness, if you like.
Right. And then there are the accidents, the qualities we perceive with our senses. The shape, the color, the taste, the texture.
So for my coffee cup, the substance is ceramic, maybe? The accidents are that it's white, smooth, holds liquid, has a handle.
Good analogy. Now, the traditional Catholic view, which we'll detail more soon, says the substance of the bread and wine completely changes into Christ's body and blood.
But the accidents, the things we perceive, stay the same. It still looks, tastes, feels like bread and wine.
Which leads to philosophical questions, right? How can the substance of blood exist without any of its usual accidents? No redness, no liquid texture.
Or for the Lutheran view, how can two distinct physical substances, bread and Christ's body, occupy the exact same space at the same time?
These aren't trivial points. They were major sticking points. And because of these difficulties, many, particularly in the Reformed camp, concluded the language must be figurative.
So this is my body means this represents my body, or this signifies my body.
Essentially, yes. But we have to be careful here, too. We shouldn't swing so far that we end up with what some call the doctrine of the real absence.
Good caution. Christ did promise to be with us when we gather, Matthew 18:20.
Right. So there is a special presence, a meeting with Christ in the supper. It's just likely, well, influential maybe, conveyed by the Spirit, rather than a change in the physical substance of the elements.
A real encounter, but not necessarily metaphysical transformation of bread and wine. We approach expecting to meet with him.
Okay, second major division, efficacy. What does the supper actually do for the person partaking? And how guaranteed is that effect?
We can sort of boil down the historical views into three main camps on this.
Go ahead.
First, there's the idea that the rite itself conveys grace, almost automatically, sometimes called ex opere operato, from the work having been worked.
The ritual itself produces the effect, regardless of the participant's inner state, basically.
Right. Then the second view is that the rite is more of an instrument. It helps create an encounter with Christ. The benefit comes from that encounter, which the supper facilitates.
So the rite is the means, the encounter is the goal, and the benefit comes from the encounter.
Seems like it. And the third view is that it's primarily a reminder, a proclamation, like a visible sermon.
A sign pointing to Christ's work.
Yeah. And in this view, any spiritual benefit depends entirely on the participant's response, their faith, their understanding, their acceptance.
Like hearing a sermon, you only benefit if you listen, understand, and believe. Otherwise, it's just words.
And Paul's warning to the Corinthians seems crucial here. He makes it clear the benefit is not automatic.
Absolutely not. He says people were getting sick, even dying, because they partook without discerning the Lord's body, without proper reflection.
So that confirms it. You need a correct understanding of what it means, and you need an appropriate response in faith.
Which circles back to that need for rigorous self-examination. It's not magic. It's an occasion for recommitment, for faith to be active.
Okay, so these two big fault lines, presence and efficacy, are what the major historical traditions tried to navigate. They developed distinct systems.
And comparing these four views, Catholic, Lutheran, Reformed, Zwinglian, really shows how they grappled with those core questions, often using that philosophical language we talked about. Hashtag the traditional Roman Catholic view. Let's start with the traditional Roman Catholic position, formalized at the Council of Trent. On presence, the key word is transubstantiation.
We touched on this. The idea that the priest's words of consecration change the very substance, the essential reality of the bread and wine.
It clearly changed into the literal physical body and blood of Christ, while the accidents, the appearance, taste, texture remain the same.
And importantly, they believe the whole Christ body, blood, soul, and divinity is present in every single particle of the consecrated bread and every drop of the wine.
Yes, that's key, which historically led to practices like adoration of the reserved host.
And for efficacy, how does it work?
The Mass is understood as a sacrificial act. It's seen as a representation, an offering of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, made present again on the altar by the priest.
And this sacrifice is considered propitiatory. It helps atone for sins.
Specifically, for venial sins, the lesser sins committed since the last confession, it's seen as applying the merits of Christ's death.
And this whole system depends entirely on sacerdotalism, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Only a validly ordained priest, standing in apostolic succession, has the power to confect the sacrament. If anyone else says the words, nothing happens. It stays bread and wine.
Which also explains why, for centuries, the cup was often withheld from the laity. If the whole Christ is in the bread, it wasn't strictly necessary, and it avoided the risk of spilling the consecrated blood.
That was part of the reasoning, yes. Hashtag the Lutheran view.
Okay, moving to Luther. He also insisted on a literal, this is my body. He couldn't let go of that, but he hated transubstantiation.
Violently rejected it. Called it Aristotelian sophistry, basically. He didn't think you needed that philosophical framework to believe the words.
So how did he explain the physical presence without transubstantiation?
He argued that Christ's body and blood are physically present in, with, and under the elements of bread and wine. The bread remains bread, the wine remains wine.
But Christ's physical body and blood are co-located with them.
In some way, yes. The analogy often used, though Lutherans don't always love the term consubstantiation, is like heat in a red-hot iron poker.
Ah, okay. The iron is still iron, but the fire permeates it completely.
Exactly. So the communicant receives both the physical bread and wine and the physical body and blood of Christ simultaneously.
And this leads to Luther's idea of manducation. What's that?
Manducation means the actual physical eating of Christ's body and drinking of his blood. Luther pointed to John 6, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, and took it very literally in the context of the supper.
And crucially, he believed everyone who takes the elements receives the physical body and blood, even unbelievers.
Yes, mandicatio indignorum, the eating by the unworthy. But only believers receive the spiritual benefit, forgiveness, strength, and faith.
And on efficacy, he rejected the Mass as a sacrifice.
Absolutely. No repeated sacrifice.
Yeah.
The benefit comes through faith receiving the word, which is proclaimed and sealed in the sacrament. It's not automatic, and it's not the priest's action, but Christ's promise that makes the presence real. No sacerdotalism needed. Hashtag the Reformed view, Calvinistic.
All right, now to the Reformed view, largely shaped by Calvin. Here we see a decisive break from any kind of localized physical presence of Christ in the elements.
Yes. The whole idea of physically eating Christ's flesh and blood was seen as, well, frankly absurd and pastorally unhelpful, and theologically problematic regarding Christ's descended human nature.
So how is Christ present then, if not physically?
It's described as a spiritual or dynamic presence. The key is that Christ's human body remains ascended in heaven at the right hand of the Father. That maintains the integrity of his finished work and ascension.
Okay, so he's not physically coming down into the bread.
No, but his influence, his life-giving power, his virtue, is genuinely conveyed to the believing communicant by the Holy Spirit.
That's where the sun analogy comes in, isn't it?
Right, Calvin used it. The sun stays physically in the sky millions of miles away.
But its light and heat are truly objectively present and effective here on Earth, giving life.
Exactly. So the Holy Spirit bridges the gap, uniting the believer to the whole Christ, including his humanity in heaven, and spiritually nourishing them through the supper.
And the efficacy, what's happening?
The elements signify and seal the promises of the gospel. They aren't empty symbols. They are divinely appointed signs that assure the believer of their union with Christ and their participation in all his benefits.
Like a seal on a legal document, confirming its validity.
Good analogy. The Westminster Confession puts it well. The body and blood are, as really but spiritually, present to the faith of believers as the elements themselves are to their outward senses.
So there's a real objective spiritual benefit offered by Christ.
Yes, it revitalizes faith, assures of grace.
But it's only received through faith. The recipient's disposition is key.
Absolutely. No faith, no benefit. It depends entirely on the Spirit working through the Word and Sacrament upon a receptive heart. #tag the Zwinglian view. Finally, the Zwinglian view, named after Ulrich Zwingli, the Swiss reformer. This view pushes furthest in the direction of symbolism.
Right. For Zwingli, the presence is understood primarily as commemoration, a memorial meal.
The elements bread and wine are seen as mere symbols or representations of Christ's body and blood which are in heaven.
So Christ isn't specially present in the elements themselves, any more than he is present when believers gather anyway.
Generally, no. The focus is on remembering Christ's sacrifice. His spiritual presence is with the gathered church, yes, but not uniquely located in the bread and wine.
Okay, so if it's primarily a memorial, what about the efficacy? What does it do?
It functions mainly as a visible proclamation of the gospel, much like preaching. And it's an occasion for believers to publicly profess their faith.
So the value isn't in the elements, or even a special spiritual influence through them.
No. The value lies entirely in the believer actively remembering Christ's death and receiving its benefits through responsive faith. Faith is what connects the believer to Christ. The supper is a sign and reminder of that connection.
The believer brings Christ to the sacrament through your faith, rather than the sacrament bringing Christ to the believer.
That's a common way of putting the Zwinglian emphasis, yes. It's an outward sign of an inward grace already possessed.
Wow, okay, those are 4 very different ways of understanding what's happening theologically and metaphysically.
And those differences inevitably spill over into how churches actually do the Lord's Supper, the practical questions.
Right, who can lead it, who can take it? What bread and wine or substitutes? How often? These become points of contention too. #tag the proper administrator and sacerdotalism.
First up, who gets to preside over the table? Scripture itself is pretty quiet on this, isn't it? We only see Jesus doing it in the Gospels.
Yeah, not a lot of explicit instruction there, so the different answers really come down to whether a church holds to sacerdotalism or not.
Exactly. As we saw, the traditional Catholic view absolutely requires an ordained priest because they believe the priest has the unique power to consecrate, to cause transubstantiation.
No priest, no sacrament.
Pretty much.
No.
But the Lutheran view, while holding to physical presence, rejects sacerdotalism. It's Christ's word and promise, not the administrator's status, that makes Christ present.
So for Lutherans, a pastor normally presides, but it's not because he has some unique power.
Correct. And then you have some non-liturgical traditions that might say almost any spiritually qualified Christian can administer it as long as they follow the right form.
And where does the Reformed tradition typically land?
Well, understanding the supper as an ordinance given to the church, there's a strong sense that it requires good order. It shouldn't be done haphazardly.
So leadership oversight is important.
Yes. Typically, it's seen as proper for the duly ordained or appointed leaders of the church, the pastor, the elders, to oversee and conduct the service.
The pastor leads, may be assisted by elders or deacons who meet the biblical qualifications.
That's the common practice. It reflects the seriousness and the corporate nature of the sacrament, ensuring it's done decently and in order, as Paul would say. #tag prerequisites for recipients.
Okay, what about who can receive communion? We agreed earlier it's for believers capable of discerning the meaning.
Yes, that's the baseline. Genuine faith, ability to self-examine, maturity.
But different groups add other requirements, don't they? These are often points of division.
They are. Some insist on a specific form of baptism, first either infant or believer's baptism.
Or require formal membership in that specific local church or denomination.
Yes, sometimes there's a minimum age requirement, tied to the ability to understand. And in some circles, particularly those emphasizing real presence, you might be required to believe in that specific doctrine of presence to partake.
Fencing the table based on doctrinal agreement about the supper itself.
It happens. But the most universal requirement, besides faith, is probably moral readiness.
Right. Virtually everyone agrees you shouldn't serve communion to someone known to be living in serious, unrepentant sin.
It comes back to Paul's warning about partaking unworthily. It demands self-examination, perhaps confession, maybe even fasting in some traditions, to prepare your heart.
And historically, the big prerequisite debate was about the cup, right?
Huge issue during the Reformation. The Catholic Church withheld the cup from the laity for centuries. The Reformers insisted that everyone receive both bread and wine, just as Christ instituted it. Communion in both kinds became a hallmark of Protestant practice.
What about the actual bread and drink? Does it have to be exactly what Jesus used?
That's the core question. Are we aiming for strict duplication of the Last Supper, or is suitable symbolism the goal?
If it's duplication, then it has to be unleavened bread because it was Passover.
Right. And actual wine, probably diluted as was common then.
But if the goal is symbolism,
then leavened bread might be fine. Perhaps even better, symbolizing the one loaf of the unified church Paul talks about. And grape juice might serve just as well as wine to represent Christ's bloodshed for sin.
so the guiding principle becomes, does the element suitably convey the meaning?
I think so. The focus should be on the symbolism of Christ's body broken and bloodshed and our unity in him.
What about the cup? Paul says one loaf, but he doesn't say one cup. Does everyone have to drink from a single chalice?
There's no command for that. While a common cup emphasizes unity, practical concerns hygiene, large crowds mean that using individual cups doesn't really compromise the core symbolism. The unity is in the partaking together, not necessarily the vessel.
And what about substitutions? If you can't get bread or wine?
Generally, you stick to bread and the fruit of the vine if at all possible. But if they're truly unavailable, maybe in a very remote or restricted context.
Like a mission field or a prison camp.
Exactly. Then using local equivalents that represent basic food and drink, like water and fish or rice and tea, might be permissible as an emergency measure. The key is conveying nourishment and sacrifice.
But you shouldn't substitute just for kicks, like cola and potato chips.
Definitely not. That's substituting for novelty or convenience, and it completely loses the connection to the original symbolism of body and blood, sacrifice, and sustenance. That seems to trivialize the ordinance. Hashtag the frequency of observance.
Last practical point. How often should churches observe the Lord's Supper? Weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually.
It's interesting. Scripture gives no explicit command on frequency. 0 didactic statements telling us, do this every X days.
So churches have to figure it out using wisdom and biblical principles.
Right, and it involves balancing those two psychological factors we talked about earlier.
Okay, refresh me. Factor 1.
The need for enough frequency. We need it often enough to keep the core truths of the gospel of Christ's death, our reliance on him consciously in front of us, to counteract our natural drift and forgetfulness.
If it's too rare, it becomes an historical footnote rather than living truth.
Precisely. But factor 2 is the need for reservation, maybe. Don't do it so often that it becomes routine, commonplace, trivial.
Like checking a box without thinking, which violates the command to self-examine.
Exactly. If it becomes just another part of the Sunday routine, like the announcements, it loses its power and significance.
So finding that balance is key. What's a practical way forward?
Many churches find a good balance by making it available frequently, maybe monthly, perhaps even more often in some settings, but emphasizing that the individual believers should determine how often they partake based on their own spiritual preparedness and desire.
So it's offered regularly, but participation requires conscious decision and self-examination each time.
It seems wise. It respects both the need for regularity and the seriousness of the act.
And maybe the setting matters too.
I think it does, giving the supper its own distinct time, perhaps even the separate service occasionally, rather than just tacking it on to the end of a sermon. That highlights its significance.
It requires people to make a definite choice to stay, to participate, to focus.
It encourages intentionality, which is crucial for meaningful observance.
Right.
Hashtag outro. So wrapping this all up, the Lord's Supper, it stands on a firm foundation, Christ established it, commanded its repetition, made it a proclamation of the gospel. That unites Christians broadly.
Yeah, the what and why are pretty clear.
But then, the how, specifically the nature of Christ's presence, that's where the paths diverge dramatically. From literal physical transformation and transubstantiation
To the co-presence of Luther's view.
to the dynamic, spiritual, influential presence emphasized in the Reformed tradition.
All the way to the primarily memorial or symbolic understanding in the Zwinglian view.
4 distinct attempts to explain those simple words, "This is my body."
And realizing how much, background philosophy like Aristotle's substance and accident shaped centuries of debate is, well, it's eye-opening, isn't it? It helps you understand why they argued the way they did.
It does. It wasn't just arbitrary disagreement.
And hopefully, understanding that history helps us approach the Rite today with more insight. The ultimate goal, surely, across all views, is to stir up our faith, our love, our gratitude as we contemplate Christ's death and his promise to return.
Amen to that. And notice, in the Reformed and Zwinglian views particularly, the emphasis is on the believer's faith being active. The danger isn't so much getting the philosophical definition slightly wrong,
As it is taking the elements lightly. Without faith, without self-examination, without discerning the Lord's body.
That's the real peril Paul warned about.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. How does knowing this history, knowing these different attempts to understand presence and efficacy, shape your self-examination next time you come to the table?
Are you focused on the physical elements themselves or on the spiritual reality they point to your union with Christ, the sealing of his promises, the nourishment of your soul through faith?
Let that reflection deepen your wonder. Maybe bring to mind those words of Charles Wesley, "Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me?"
That's the truth. That's the love we remember and proclaim until he comes.